So I was kicked out of yet another Israel-Palestine debate live this morning for stating this to Israelis, that the indigenous claim is not a good claim for being allowed to control a piece of land, which is why I'm also not for handing over ownership of the U.S. to indigenous Americans or the people that they may have taken the land from. Because at the end of the day, the land belongs to whoever wants it bad enough or does more effectively to keep it than the other guy. Now, what I would consider the real spectacle of those arguing typically for the Israeli side most of the time are these atheistic or unaffiliated individuals with a supposed Jewish pedigree that argue off a claim that supposedly appears in a book that they typically don't believe in or practice on what it has to say on the issue. Now, don't get me wrong, I support Israel and I'm also an Israeli citizen. I lived in Israel for 5 years, but it's really not hard to see why many people who aren't already ideologically connected to the Jewish people take such an argument seriously. And being that indigenous Arabs also make an indigenous claim on the land means that the argument is really not an effective one. Not to mention that in Judaism we know that someone who is a convert to Judaism, i.e. without a Hebraic pedigree and is Torah observant, could also make a claim to the land. Meaning that even from our source material, you don't need to be indigenous to be allowed to reside in the land or even control it. Not to mention that the biblical people of Israel in the first place also had to displace native Canaanites in order to acquire the land. And it seems that even God, who told them to do so, didn't care much about such indigenous claims in the first place. And also that the same God taught us that the land doesn't belong to Israel, but to him, and that we're just workers working his land, and that only Torah observant Jews are allowed to live in it. But those Israelis will never tell you that. Meaning, if you were an ethnic Jew, whatever that really means in biblical times, and you were not Torah observant, you would either be kicked out of the land or be killed by Jews. Actually, have you ever asked how long biblical Israel actually lived in the land? Well, it was a total of 1,300 years. And have you also asked how long did Muslims live in that piece of land? It was roughly the same amount of time. So the most effective way to win the IP debate is to convert your opponent to the only religion that states that the land belongs to you. I mean, really only Torah observant Jews it belongs to, but regardless, it's a start. Because otherwise you're making secular claims, right? The indigenous claim is mainly a secular claim because it's not really biblical, to combat a position that is mainly fueled by religion and ideology. That's it.